Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 299. Today's podcast is brought to you by hitaboard.com and the new Teeter Teach It, an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hitaboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hitaboard.com.
Today, we're talking about playing it safe in dog agility. And before we get started, I think we need to define exactly what we mean by playing it safe. So I'll start with you, Sarah. What goes through your mind when someone says, hey, play it safe out there?
I guess in a nutshell, going for the cue. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Going for the cue over going for raw speed, first place, the most aggressive run, really focusing on being right and getting the cue.
You said some interesting things there. Let me go over to Jen now. Jen, what do you think?
I didn't even think about it in terms of qualifying or not, but I think of going safe as sacrificing a little bit of the time to choose a plan that has increased risk of success, right? So you choose a safer, more reliable plan, but at the cost of giving up a little bit time. So, giving up that faster, more efficient plan that also then comes with more risk.
Yeah, I think that's a very good working definition that we can go by. So you're sacrificing some time, you're giving up some equity here, but you're gaining something, presumably, right? So I think some common examples would be that come to mind: contacts, right? So if you have a very good stop contact, you might wait for a second, especially on something like the teeter. Let's say you have a judge who's very quick to call fly-offs even when the dog has not actually flown off the teeter. That might be a great time to be a little bit conservative. You're going to add at least several tenths of a second. But if you're in the preliminary round of, say, a big event where clean runs are very, very important, and we'll get into this, that might be a great time for that. And so let's work backwards. So Jennifer, what's a great time to not play it safe, where we want to get the fastest possible time for a dog?
I think the first moment that comes to mind is AKC Nationals Challengers Round. That is the one time that I can think, no matter what, you got to go all in, right? One winner, second place gets you nothing. You could be second by 0.003 and it gets you nothing. The only possible exception to that would be if, of all of the dogs in Challengers, nobody has run clean and you're the last dog to step to the line. But I think the odds of that are pretty slim.
Play it safe.
In that case, play it safe. But that is the one time I think of in our sport, for me personally, at least, that it is most a all out, go for it, take the risk. Even more so for me personally than a lot of finals events, it's that Challengers Round where you're just leaving it all on the course and taking the risk to shave every little bit of time you can.
Those are really, really, really good examples. And I think we've actually seen that happen in the Challengers Round. I'm thinking of the big dogs. Maybe it was either 26 or 24C, where everyone faulted and the last dog has to run clean. So what happens in the Challenger Round if no dog posts a clean run?
I believe no dog goes on to the finals.
You can only advance to the final if, one, you win the Challenger Round and you have a clean run.
Yep.
Right. So that's by AKC rule. So there it makes sense to be conservative in the way that we are talking about, where you're sacrificing time to ensure that your run is clean.
Right.
Essentially, because it is so important. It's interesting that you reach for the Challenger Round and not for the finals. So tell me a little bit about that. Why wouldn't this apply to finals? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who think this: I'm going to be relatively conservative at all my local trials, maybe even the preliminary rounds of AKC Nationals. But once I get to the finals, no matter what, I am definitely going to go all out in the finals. And I've seen people do this, and I agree with you, and not the optimal strategy. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think it really depends on everybody's individual goals for that national and for that dog. But for me personally, and I'll speak of my experience, but my goal is always to make finals, right? The goal is to get there. Once I get there, once I'm in finals, the strategy kind of changes from dog to dog and scenario to scenario. But, I look at it and I say, okay, do I want to take the risk? Do I want to risk it all? Let's say I'm going to go for the front. If I can make the front happen, it's going to be faster, but there's high risk of a bar along the way. I'm just using that hypothetically. Do I want to take that chance? And yes, maybe it will get me that first or second finish, but it also might cause the bar in which I don't even finish top 8. So at AKC Nationals, they kind of do ribbons top 8. Top 4 get the podium photo, right? You get the podium, you get the trophy. In past years, you've even gotten invites to future events. So there's a lot to be said for a 3rd or 4th place finish where you have a ribbon, you get to take your photo, maybe you get invited to something versus laying it all out there and risking the bar. And now you're 13th place in the 20-inch class and you just get a good job. There's no ribbon to take home beyond your finalist ribbon. So I think it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Now, I can tell you that I have been in situations where, and I'll use Pink as an example, she won nationals. The year that we won nationals, I was just going to have a clean run. It happened to be that she won, but she was just going to have a clean run. It was her first national. She was a young dog, but then you've won. So when I went back to finals, I will admit that was one of the few times I said, I'm going for the win. I've already won.
You don't want to take a step backwards.
I don't want to take a step backwards. So I'm going to gun for it. But most of the times that I'm in finals, I'm happy to aim for a top 4, top 8 finish versus risking everything and ending up with nothing. So I think, it's the same thing at USDAA, podium is top 3. You get on the podium, you get your medal, you get your photo. So would you rather be 2nd or 3rd or nothing at all, as you made the attempt to get that first place? So I really think it depends on the individual team and what they're trying to accomplish. For me, I want a nice solid finish more than I want to give it all up for that one win.
And really, as you said, not only what they want to accomplish, but what they've already accomplished, right? That totally changes your perspective on the run and what it means for you as a team. I think one of the interesting things is that we immediately jumped here to big events. And I think I think that is correct. I think that there is more strategy in big events than there is, weekend to weekend trials. And I think that sometimes people don't necessarily recognize that aspect of big events. They kind of treat everything the same, whether it's local, whether it's a big event, or even worse, they treat them completely different, right? They treat local one way, they treat big events another with no real crossover experience. But I do think it's interesting that we talk about the big events. I remember very clearly, because I thought it was so interesting, it really jumped out at me. We were watching Crufts, and the announcers for Crufts were talking about Greg Darrett, and they were talking about, Greg Darrett is the ultimate strategist. He is always has the best strategy for Crufts. And I thought, I don't even know what they mean by that. But when you looked at the results in the preliminary rounds of Crufts, he'd be middle of the pack or even on the low end, but he would make finals. And then he went into finals and he would be 1, 2, or 3, right? And I'm watching his runs and I don't even know what he's doing different, but somehow he is making choices or running a little different or pushing a little harder or whatever, such that his times were much slower in the preliminary rounds. And then once he got to finals, boom, he just killed it, And so whenever I hear somebody talk about strategy, I always think about that commentator for Crufts talking about that. But I knew that Jen would have some takes on it because she's been to so many different events. And even just within the event, I know I've heard Jen talk about, the team event of the Agility World Championship versus the individual event of the Agility World Championship. Same venue, same event. It's the world championships, but there is a different approach to the team than there is to the individual, right, Jen?
Absolutely. And those who have followed along with the podcast long enough know that the strategy of agility is like my favorite. I love the handling, I love the training, but the strategy, loving the games, the snooker and the gambles, but exactly what you're mentioning. Like I want to be the person that the commentator is talking about in the US about understanding strategy and playing into it, because I love that part of it. Knowing when to push and going for it, knowing when to hold back, that whole don't show your cards. Right? Don't go too fast in those preliminary rounds and make everybody want to be aiming for you. Just do enough to get in the finals, and then bam, throw it all out there.
That's so interesting, because I feel like Esteban is started out, at least, very much the opposite. Like I know in our younger days of agility, Esteban's goal every single time he went to the line was to beat everybody and to beat them as badly as possible. Like he always wanted to have the fastest possible time. Now, I will say, to his credit, as a trainer, that was not at the expense of contacts. He wasn't ripping his dog off contacts or doing bad training things, but he always had that fire for the win. And I think it took some years in the sport to kind of view some of the national level events through a slightly different lens and kind of understand the difference between, right now we're talking about AKC Nationals because it's right around the corner, right? And how do you approach it different if you've run clean in the first 2 rounds and with pretty good times, and you just need a third clean round, versus how do you approach it if you need to get in through the challenger round? And he's been in the challengers round and he's been in the finals, and he understands how different those two paths are. And so, like, what do you think about your evolution in how you approach the strategy side?
Yeah, I think experience, right, is the best teacher. So after having done a 16-inch challenge round a couple of years and having to go up against, I want to say it was John Nye's dog at that time. There was a world champion at that time that we had to run against at local trials. Jen, do you remember? This is like several years ago.
I'm trying. Well, Rush
So it must have been
won.
Rush.
Yes, Rush.
Rush won NAC. Yep.
Yeah. So you end up in the challenger round, like running against Rush, and like you're not, and I had a little border collie at the time, like you're just not getting out of that. And then I think with the Rottweiler, we were also in a challenge round where she, I think, had like the second or third fastest time of like all heights in a challenger round, but we were up against Juice, the border collie, Marcus Thompson Juice, the year they won the world championship. And sadly, they beat us in the challenge round. So they got the 24-inch spot. Now, whether or not they should have been in 24-inch, this was back when 20-inch dogs could jump 24-inch. And so they got the 24-inch spot and ended up not winning the finals. It's one of the things Juice never accomplished, was winning NAC. And so if that's what you're talking about, yeah, it sucks to try and get out of the challenge round, right? You want to get in. The easiest path is obviously to go 3 clean. So I'll fast forward now to Gitchi, where, that first year I took her, I was still in the mindset of, well, we were trying to make international teams, this, that, or the other. And here the considerations are like, even a little bit like, what are the coaches looking for? Or what is the coach? At that time it was Nancy Guy. So I guess she still is the coach. But like, are they going to be watching you at nationals? Like, what height should you jump? So I'm running this dog who normally jumps at 20 inches. You're jumping them at 26 inches, right? So bars were already an issue with her at 20 inches. They're going to be even more of an issue at 26 inches. So that's one, just like deciding what height to jump as part of what is your best chance of NAC, like making the finals and then possibly winning? Is it at 20 inches or is it 26 inches, right? Where there are so many fewer dogs at 26 inches, but the competition is so much more tough, difficult, right? And you're adding 6 inches in height.
Exactly.
It's physically
for bars.
more demanding for the dog, especially for a bar knocker, right? So you have to think about that. But I came in there and, I didn't really know how she would stack up well against these border collies. It turned out she stacks up pretty well. And I was just out there running everything all out. So I remember one year they had a choice on a weave pole entry. Like you could wrap it one way or the other way. One is like almost a straight entry into the weave. The other one was like difficult soft side entry, right? And I'm like, okay, well, that's the faster path. That's what I'm going to do. And you see all these more experienced teams. I remember like Pace was out there. I think they won that year, going the other way. And I was like, oh, well, I mean, this is silly. Like we're going to beat them just off this one turn. And she never misses, but she missed. So this the one weave entry that in all the years I went to AKC Nationals, Gitchi's only missed one weave entry, and that was it. And it kept us out of the finals.
And all you needed was a clean run.
All you needed was a clean run, right? It's not like you had a place or anything like that. It's ridiculous, right? This is 26 inches. And then the next year was, I think, some serpentine or something. I'm running it as a serpentine. You could have just ran it with like rears or something like that. I don't know, giving her a little more heads up. Serpentines, for people who don't know, for bar knockers, can sometimes add a little pressure to the bar, make it a little more likely that they drop the bar. So, of course, ticks the bar comes down, you're out again. And so once I was like, okay, look, and Sarah's all like, like maybe you shouldn't be running all out like every single run. I'm like, all right, because the first year I'm like justifying it. I've got videos, I got side by sides. I'm like, it's ridiculous that someone would choose to do this rather than this. I mean, it's virtually 100% that she's going to make this entry. Like, to this day, I don't know why she missed, but it's a difficult entry.
Bigger picture.
Sure. So bigger picture. Anyway, so I'm like, okay, I'll be a little more conservative, whatever that means. And so for Gitchi and bar knockers, it meant a very specific thing. It meant replacing a lot of the front crosses you would normally do, or high pressure situations, and pressure over the bar situations, not high pressure, general pressure, SERPs with basically rear crosses, right? To get the dog seeing the turns and coming as early as possible, seeing the next bar as soon as possible without blocking her view with my body, things like that, right? And so you're doing more rears there. And so once that happened, it was just finals, like 3 or 4 years in a row, just getting in the finals and getting placements, almost winning one year. So that was a big strategy change. I remember back in 07 or 06, I don't know, the first year of the Invitational, we went with a Rottweiler, and I won round one. I went out there to kill it and win it, and I did. And there were great dogs at that time. Blitza, the German Shepherd. There were so many great dogs, right, running in the 24-inch class at that time, like real just monsters, beasts, very fast. And I won. I was so hyped up. I was like, I'm gonna win every single round and the finals. Okay. So I'm doing all these front crosses. Round 2, off course. Round 3, off course. Round 4, off course. All front crosses, all off course. Just boom. Just fell for every trap. And I was out. It was a long drive from Long Beach back to Texas. And the next year, completely changed the strategy, right? And I was like, okay, we're not going to try and win every single round. So the next year, we did not win a single round. It was always like 3rd, 4th, 5th, right? But ended up making the finals and then almost winning that, right? Like quarter of a second, like 4 dogs all separated by 0.3 of a second or less. And I think we got, I don't even remember, 3rd. I think it was 3rd, something like that in the finals. But I would not have been in that position, I think, had I continued to go all out. So at that point, there's some gamesmanship, there's strategy. And then I felt like I finally had to acknowledge, okay, like maybe you can't run all out. It's not that you're going to fail. It's not that it's a horrible thing to do. It's just that strategically,
it's like not optimum.
You're not optimizing for the result that you want.
Right. Because not every round is the same, right? Not every round counts for the same. It
doesn't have the same value. Some rounds are riskier than others.
Right.
Some people will have more problems with jumpers. Some people have very bad contacts. So contacts are riskier for them. So I think that's where I'm coming from on that side. But Jen, there's an entire generation of handlers, I still hear it today, that are more like me than you, in that they say this. They have, I think they have like 2 reasons. One reason is I have to run all out because, if I run any other way, things go wrong. But when I run all out, like after we fault and then I just go crazy and I do all the things that I really wanted to do, I just have great runs. And if only I could run like that all the time, it would be amazing. So what do you think about that when people say, they kind of give that argument?
Well, as you were going over kind of your learning path, right? Experience being the best teacher, you learned, go for it, and had to learn how to kind of run the more safe and consistent. And I was brought up the exact opposite, right? Team, think for the team. Everything was think for the team. I remember, and it makes me think of this because you guys are from Texas, but when I was in high school, we would take a 2-week trip in our trailer with my parents down to the big Texas shows. There were 2 4-day shows back to back.
Yeah, Reliant, or
And I
back then the
remember
Astor Hall.
My mom and I, we would have this competition to see how many double Qs in a row we could go without a fault. And I remember that year I went 16 for 16 with my Sheltie guess.
Wow.
Just because it was like the goal was to like run clean, run clean, run clean. But as you were talking, what I was thinking, so I had to learn how to push. And that's where I'm going with this is if you only ever do it one way, it makes it really hard to then adjust. So if you are in the mindset of run clean, run clean, run clean, be safe. And I think there's a lot of people out there, not just myself, and I will use, and hopefully don't mean this in a negative, but a lot of people that are going for invitational. Mm-hmm. Every run counts. Even if they're not on a double Q, that other run counts, right? Where a lot of times we'll hear people, oh, I'm not on a double Q, well, I'll push. So you're going clean, you're going clean, you're going clean. Well, now you're put in a position to push and you don't know how. Your dog doesn't know how to adapt to your change. You don't even know what that means. And that's where I was at. It finally got to the point where it's like, okay, we need to push. We need to go. And I was like, how? What do you mean? And it was a very long process to learn how to push, just like you had the mentality of pushing and going and winning and had to learn how to rein it in. And I think really what people need is the ability to do both and practicing both, whether you do it run to run, trial to trial, and you say, okay, Friday's my day to really focus on trying to get that triple Q, right? I'm going to get a standard, a jumpers, and a fast, and I'm going to make my goal not winning the class, but getting a triple Q. And then on Saturday, I'm going to try to lay it all out there and see how fast I can make my yards per second. Or a lot of people will. They're not on the double Q. They'll go on that second run. Well, I'm not on a double Q. I'm really going to go for it. And sometimes that's good. But I think a really well-rounded handler and trainer, both from their physical skills as well as their mental game, can work on having the ability to do both. And I think that's my takeaway is like, make that a priority, is to work on having the ability to do both.
I totally agree. I think that's really the net takeaway here is that agility is a more complex sport than just the fastest dog wins. I think sometimes we think of it that way, but I think that we've proven through conversation that it's not exactly, that's not the whole story, right? That there is more strategy, especially when we're talking about events, and that you've got to take these practices and do it in your, your home field practice, as well as in your local trials, as well as in the big national events. And I would say, for somebody who really wants to optimize their mental game performance, their ability to handle pressure. Like you said, I think going for it when you don't have a double Q on the line is a great time to go for it. But, if you struggle with the mental game, maybe going for it when you have the double Q is actually what gives you the best practice that's going to translate the best for, like, now I'm in a final situation, or now I'm in a challenger round situation where not only do I have to go for it, I really, really want it, and putting that extra pressure on yourself. So if you have the time, this kind of comes back to another idea that I've had, and I think we'll probably have a whole nother podcast on that, is to really know why, like, what is your goal for every practice and for every trial. You can have goals for trials beyond cues, beyond points. And that goal can be, like Jen said, I think it's great to say, this day, my goal is a double Q. This day, my goal is first place. This day, my goal is to, have fun with my dog, whatever. But to really think before you go out there and compete, think about what your goal is, because your goal does change how you approach the course, how you approach your handling, how you approach your path, your handling choices, your routine, and everything.
Well, let's talk about one more aspect of this. I definitely want to know what Jen does. In fact, what I would like to do more than anything that I have not yet had the chance to do is watch Jen train. Like, I just like watching people train because it's interesting, right? Everybody trains a little bit differently. But I think that's where you kind of see, like, who really knows what they're about with this dog training business. And I know that there are a lot of people, I think less so with beginners now that I think about it, and more so with experienced competitors, where they practice at kind of a sub-effort level. They kind of take it easy in practice. Like their walkthrough, they're like laughing and joking and yucking it up. And then they find that they're at nationals, and then you got to be serious, and it's strange to them. They don't run all out necessarily, or they're just not quite putting in the same intensity into their practice that they are at their actual trialing. And so, so far we've talked about the difference between local trials and big events, and then even within big events, preliminary rounds, and then challenge round versus final. But Jennifer, what about just practices? Like, is it ever okay to be cruising, taking it easy in practices, or should our practices kind of be all out, or should there be some gamesmanship type stuff going on even at the practice level?
I think a little bit of it depends on what you define as practice, because thinking personal experience, and I thought you were going to kind of ask, what I do personally. I will tell you that if we're defining practice as a non-trial, then most of my practicing is not being done with extreme intensity. However, I would argue that a large portion of my training occurs at local trials. Mm-hmm. Like where a lot of people would go to a local club and they're going to go do run throughs, and they're going to pay, $20 for their 3 run throughs, and they have 90 seconds in the ring and they get to do what they want. And, somebody's they're hitting the go box.
Like show and goes and
show and goes and run throughs. Like that's training. Well, my equivalent of that is local shows.
Gotcha.
So I would constitute my local shows as still the category of training. In which case that is happening at a much more intense level. But rarely am I concerned about the outcome of a local show. Hence why I consider it training. Right. I'm using like my training in my backyard during the week is like more skill based, working on, weave pull entries or tightening up turns, discriminations, verbals. I rarely run full courses in my building in training. And then it's like, okay, well, we're training Saturday morning. It's just, I'm paying a really high rate at $19 for 45 seconds to train. And I'm going out there and training. So now I'm running a full course. Now I'm running with more intensity, but I will be the first to admit, and I'm not saying that this is what the average person should do, but I'm answering the question for myself. It's still, to me, training. I'm very rarely tied to the direct outcome of a local show.
Yeah.
I'm using that as training. If you are thinking just generically like, okay, let's not use my situation as an example. I think I'm an outlier in that, and I'm an exception to that. Then absolutely you should be training full courses with full intensity. Mm-hmm. You can't expect to just be cruising around in your flip-flops, doing all your training Monday through Friday, and then show up on Saturday and like tighten the laces and let the dog run at an increased speed with you running with an increased speed and intensity, and all of a sudden now doing 18 obstacles and not expect there to be some level of learning curve on that.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And that's where you can play, little games. I have my NAC prep seminar series that I'm doing live. And on the 3rd workshop, there's monetary benefits to running fast and efficient, right? Mm-hmm. So we basically recreate an NAC with prizes, right? Round 1, round 2, there's prizes for who can run 3 clear. There's prizes for who can win the quote unquote challengers round. And I think that's a good opportunity to put a little something on the line, but know that at the end of the day, it is still training, right? It's not a trial. So I certainly think practicing is very, practicing pushing is very important to then your ability to go out there and do it in a trial situation or in a big event like nationals or whatever.
Yeah, that's so great that you mentioned that because, I mean, I do that too. I certainly did that with Gitchi. I'm not sure if I did that with dogs before Gitchi. I think in the context of training contacts. So that there were times where I didn't care about a double Q. Say I ran clean and jumpers and I'm working on a double Q, or I remember retraining the Rottweiler's start lines, and she happened to Q in jumpers. So she was potential double cue. And she stood up and I left the ring and people were freaking out. They were like, what are you doing?
You could have still done it.
You could have just made her sit again. Or it's not like she moved forward. All she did was stand up. And I was like, but she didn't meet the criteria and that was that. I feel like a year later, right, that paid dividends, right? Because she's showing up at these big events and having these big runs and doing very well. And so that's the price that I was willing to pay. So in that sense, yeah, I did do that. That was more with contacts. With Gitchi, it was much more handling. So that at that time there would be I guess Premiere in the last couple of years came around. And so there'd be multiple ways to do a particular sequence, right? You can handle it all pushing from one side, like basically backsides, or you can be on the other side and maybe throttle it. And I would be like, okay, this is suboptimal to do like consecutive throttling. And I wouldn't necessarily do this in the final of a big event, but you know what? I'm going to do it here because we're so bad at this. So I would intentionally pick things we were not good at. And I would force us to do them. I would pick a run where I would say, it's very difficult to do this rear cross here and this rear cross. You know what? We're just going to do all 5 changes here. They're all going to be rear crosses. And then over here, I'm going to be like, these are likely bar knocking spots on fronts. We're just doing all with the fronts, and I wouldn't care if you win, you get double cues, things get thrown away. First clean runs get thrown away. Sometimes maybe that puts you at odds with like the owner, who would like you to optimize around ribbons and whatnot. But, I think of it as a long-term investment, and again, with Gitchi, I felt like it paid for itself, the work that we did there. And so in that sense, totally agree with you what you're saying. And it's so very well put. Whereas for a lot of people, definitely, if you're not going to big events, I think this is probably the case, but local trials is like the everything, and queuing becomes the everything. And then I think that can have a very negative impact on the way you execute your runs potentially, so very interesting. All right. So like so many other podcasts, we have arrived at our answer to the question of, should you play it safe?
It depends.
It depends, right? It depends on you, your dog, your goals, your experience, the venue, the rules. Is it the finals, a challenge round, the preliminary round? Is it an AKC event, a USDA event, an international event? So you got to take all of those into consideration. And that's part of the fun of agility.
Yeah, that's right. I will put in one last pitch, though, that this reminded me of, and that is you should read the rules. So every event that you go to, you should read the rules. It's important to understand the scoring and all of that stuff. It is part of the game. So just putting that out there, especially as we go into nationals and people are going to their first nationals, just, read through the premium, read through the rules, understand how things are done, and that will help you make the best decisions. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsor, hititboard.com. Happy training.
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.